Expectation. Reality. Yeah, this weapon is really weird. I would say it's in desperate need of a rework. Yeah, so a lot of buffs were dished out to saws specifically, and this weapon actually retained, I would say, about like next to none of them for the most part. What I showed here with the Sisyphean Insurrectionist was that if you punch the saw, obviously it gets the double damage bonus, as most people know. It gets it for about 3 seconds now, which is nice, right? So I was able to deal about like 65-ish damage, I would say, to the Insurrectionist. That's because it takes double damage it's on fire, and the saw sets it on fire, so it's just like a match made in heaven. You get the double damage from the punch, the double damage from the fire, and it's great. It lasts for 3 seconds, so it probably would have killed the entire Insurrectionist by that point, but whatever. That's why I showed you guys the Ferryman example. That being said, these guys don't take extra damage from fire, or being on fire, or don't get set on fire, and if the saw, after being punched, hits a second enemy, basically it stops getting its double damage bonus. So the fact that this Insurrectionist was alone, there's only like I would say like 1 or 2 examples in the game of this being the case with the Insurrectionist, where he's alone and you can actually get the value that way. Sometimes he just jumps into the air and you don't get the value, right? So that's roughly even the case to begin with, but then you have the Ferryman, and instead of taking about 21 damage, they would take instead about 42 damage, because the saw in total does about 21 damage. I'll show that off here. Well, funnily enough, I'm about to explain that the saw does 21 damage, and in theory it does, but there are circumstances in which that is actually not true and it instead does 22 damage. But yeah, for now, I'll just go at doing 21 damage. So it's about to do 21 damage to the Ferryman, which will leave it at 9 health. To select it, 9 health, right? Because Ferryman has 30 health. So if I were to punch it in a solo Ferryman fight, that would do about 42 damage, which would kill the Ferryman, and then some, right? Which is really nice. But obviously it's not usually the case. Think about, you know, P-2 or like a lot of custom levels out there. As well in the Cyber Grind, Ferrymen are never alone unless they're in their own stage, which is 5-2. Even in like 8-3 and their secret encounter, they are not alone. They are together, and you're not going to get that double damage bonus when fighting them. But yeah, I did just say that there's a way to get 22 damage from Ferryman, and I'll show you exactly how. It's really weird, but if you launch a half-charge saw, it does 22 damage, and there's a specific reason for that. Here, see how it's at 8 health, it had 30 health, so it took 22 damage, which for some reason means that throwing out a half-charge saw is better than throwing out a full-charge saw, which is really stupid, right? That should make absolutely 0 sense. But it is the case, and the reason why is because whenever the saw does that little hit stop thing that it does, right? You see how the saw stops in place for a sec? That's it dealing out its like 3-hit combo. It deals 3 hits every time it stops at max charge, which is 3 + 3 + 3, and it does that until it does it 7 times, which is the total of 21 damage, right? So let's say, for example, there's 2 hits left on a saw that's supposed to do a triple hit. It's going to do the triple hit, even if it only has 2 hits left. It does every hit remaining in the hit stop that's necessary, and then whatever is left for the actual multi-hit it's intended to do. The same thing can be observed with the chainsaw, actually. But we've only talked about max charge and half charge, which are 2 states of the saw. There's also min charge, or minimum charge, whatever you want to call it. So the minimum charge on the Overheat has a really weird and stupid mechanic with it. So before I begin demonstrating, I do want to iterate that this weapon cannot proc the jumpstart. So like normally saws will proc the jumpstart, right? And that can cause it to go faster and do more damage. But that is evidently not the case with the Overheat Saw Blade Launcher. However, it is the case if you release the saw at minimum charge. And I'll show you right now. Yeah, for some reason it causes the Overheat Saw Blade to charge the jumpstart when it is released at minimum heat. That is because there's no multi-hit. I'm sure that's the reason why, but yeah, that's really weird, right? Because that would then suggest that the minimum heat is actually better than the maximum heat, because you're still getting 21 damage from the minimum heat, which means that the minimum heat is better than the max heat. And The half heat is better than the max heat because the max heat gives only 21 damage, and the half heat only gives about 22 damage, and the minimum heat can proc the jumpstart. So what is actually the point of having a max heat saw? The answer actually is there's no point. Maybe you can technically get like more hits with the double damage bonus on one specific enemy because of the hit stop, but that's like the only example of that being the case. But in every other time that you're using this weapon that isn't on like a boss, for instance, you're not going to get that double damage value. Yeah, this weapon pretty much makes zero sense balancing wise. I think there's a lot of ways that this can be fixed. I personally believe that they should get rid of the fact that whenever you punch the saw and the saw hits a second enemy after getting the double damage bonus, that it loses that bonus. I think it should just retain that bonus for a full 3 seconds. Because it sucks that it's only really useful against bosses in the game, which are already really easy like to begin with. There's so many ways to kill them, and the Overheat Saw Blade Launcher is kind of like a, okay, I guess, like it's neat to have. I know there's some speedrun scenarios where it's actually good. I don't know how many of them are using punches anyway to begin with, so, you know. The chainsaw gets a lot of benefits from the saw punch change because it's only 2 different hits, right? It's 6 damage and then 6 damage and then the chainsaw breaks, which means that even if it hits a second enemy, the first hit being 6 damage turns it into 12, which means the next hit is going to be 6. But even still, the radius on the chainsaw is so tiny that you're usually going to end up hitting one enemy anyway with this, right? So like, if I put a ferryman in here, that's going to deal about 24 damage to him, right? And if he runs through this, it's very likely he's going to take both hits. So it's really well balanced for the effects of the chainsaw, but it doesn't help at all the case of the Overheat Saw Blade Launcher. Right? I can punch this, and realistically, it's just going to do next to nothing because these 2 enemies are next to each other. And yeah, it's really going to do menial amounts of damage. Now, apart from the fact that this weapon just doesn't make any sense to begin with, it's very important to compare it to its cousin, that being the Overheat Nail Gun, right? And the Overheat Nail Gun has a lot of perks to it, right? The fact that it sets enemies on fire, the fact that it deals bonus damage to husks that are on fire as well, the fact that it is the fastest nail output in the game makes it so that it's really, really good for conduction, which relies on having a lot of nails. Now, I'm saying that despite conduction being broken currently, but in the world where conduction actually works, that is how it would function. Yeah, this would be the best conduction weapon. Even still, you're getting 11 damage for barrage, and even throwing 1 nail out means that using the jumpstart will oftentimes get you bonus conduction damage. So yeah, it's just the better AoE weapon in pretty much every scenario, I would say. And you also have far more control over where you're shooting your nails, whereas with the Overheat Saw Blade, you kind of need to rely on enemies being kited into a small area, and you don't really have control over which ones are getting hit, as much as you do when you have the Overheat Nail Gun, which is a huge, huge benefit. So that's pretty much the only reason the Overheat Saw Blade Launcher is even decent right now, is that, you know, saw punching is good against bosses, and that is because saw punching is good against bosses, and, you know, some rooms maybe in the campaign, it's not good at all in the cyber grind. And the nail gun, yeah, conduction is currently not functioning. It has a huge cap on its damage capacity, so it does about only 2 damage maximum per burst of conduction, as opposed to dealing something really highly scalable like 6 or 8, sometimes even 10 damage in a conduction burst. Yeah, that's just not possible anymore. So basically, because conduction is cut down in half or even a quarter, you could argue, this Saw Blade Launcher has a little bit more of a niche. I'm not saying that conduction should remain nerfed at all. I'm saying that this weapon should definitely perform as it is designed to perform. It shouldn't have 3 different niches for each stage of the heat, because the game incentivizes that you use the max heat saw. The game incentivizes that you use max heat overnail. It just doesn't make any sense that there would be 3 different stages with 3 different perks that are, and the 2 worst stages arguably are actually better than the max stage. That shouldn't be the case at all. So I would say this weapon dramatically needs a rework. I think that there should be punishments for using the lower heats, like potentially the saw only dealing up to 7 damage on min heat and 14 damage on second heat or half heat, and then on full heat it should deal the full 21 damage. And then I think that you should be able to saw punch, and that limit from hitting a second enemy is completely removed. That way you can get up to 42 damage, which isn't exactly 42 damage because it's, again, there's a 3-second limit on it, right? And that 3-second limit can cause you to get something as low as 30 or 36 damage, something like that. But still, that's a niche that actually fits in the game, right? It's good against insurrectionists. It's actually decent against Mirror Reapers, theoretically. Right? Because Mirror Reapers are also a husk and they take extra damage from burning saws. Yeah, dealing about 18 damage is nice, but if you punch the saw, right, you get far better results. And being able to rely on that is an extremely nice niche for, you know, if you really hate Mirror Reapers. So, yeah, I would say the weapon deserves to be felt in a way that it actually feels like it functions, first of all. And, yeah, I mean, I would also say for conduction. I would also say for the jumpstart, I think that because we're separating the damage by 7, 14, and 21, it should make it so that the first hit of every multi-hit will actually proc the jumpstart. I think that should be the same for the chainsaw too. It'd be really cool to see more people utilizing the chainsaw attach, and that would mean that you would get about 2 jumpstart procs with the chainsaw, which isn't that great, but it's a nice little booster for all of the saws, I would say. So yeah, those would be all of my suggestions. I think it would make it a very elite weapon and finally give like all of the saws a bit more of a niche. I do think that there are still some problems with nail guns and stuff like that, namely the attractor nail gun, and I think that the jumpstart saw blade launcher, even though it's great in specific builds, definitely lacks like a more broader application. Its niche is mainly ADA, I would say. Like this is kind of the only build that it works in that's really good. Because if you run out of these saw blades, you can use these saw blades as a backup, but I feel like they should have a bit more of a versatile application without trumping, obviously, the attractor saw blade launcher, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But yeah, in theory, with all of these things, I think that saws alone could be treated as a more, you know, powerful substitute for using nail guns at all. Yeah, I think all the more to incentivize build diversity is basically like the best stream for this game. And seeing that the Overheat Saw blade launcher basically has like extremely confusing gimmicks and stuff that really confuse its proper application in the game is really saddening. So yeah, I would definitely suggest a bit of a base rework and just removing that nerf that they put on it. It's really the only saw that suffers from the fact that hitting a second enemy really reduces its damage that much. So yeah, lift that and the weapon will become greatly powerful from there. Yeah, again, I'm sorry this is a rant, but this has been my rant, and I hope you guys agree, disagree. If you want in the comments, I'll be reading them all. Yeah, thanks for watching.